When I came to you, brothers and sisters, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and fear, with much trembling, that my message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on the man's wisdom, but on God's power. This is my prayer. Thank you. Be seated. This week I was speaking in my office. My office is a way station for pastors when they come to visit at the hospital. You know, they've been driving from Jacksonville to Fernandina, and they're hot, and they come through my office, and they sit down, and I usually have an extra bottle of water, and I offer some water, and they sit down, and how's it going? You know, tell me about your work. And so I was, this sermon was on the computer, and my friend asked me what I was doing. I said, well, I'm working on a sermon. He goes, you preach? Poorly, but yeah, okay, here we go. And he said, and you work from a manuscript? And I said, yeah, I always have, even when I was a Baptist pastor. And there was this moment of, what universe are you from? Speaking, he said, I've never known a Baptist pastor who wrote anything down. I said, well, I do, and I follow the example of Ted Schroeder because he provides a manuscript for the people to read along as he's preaching. And there was another one of those moments of, and why would you do that? And I said, I'm not sure, but I guess they underline it if I get it wrong and hand it in. I appreciate those red marked papers from last time I was here, but thank you, Miss Edwards, for teaching me some modicum of grammar in those days. No, but it is a good discipline to be here and to work on what to say. And when I spoke with Dawn before I came, earlier as we prepared for this, I said my direction is humility and service, the humility of the servant. And I'm not sure where that's going to go and how that's going to be. And your song was exactly what I was trying to understand and to know. So thank you for the grace of being here and for the way you listen. And put down the red pens and let's get this together. People love a story. We love to hear the story about a hero who rights the wrongs in the world. We love reading stories about good people and bad people, noble causes and selfish desires. We flock to movies that keep us on the edge of our seat. Writers like Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo, my very favorite, John Grisham and Tolkien, my second favorite, are all treasured because they can tell a great story. When Dickens wrote Great Expectations, that really wasn't what he had in mind for the outcome of the book, but it turned out to be that way. The book came out in serial form, chapter by chapter, and people would line up for hours waiting for the next chapter to be printed. We have a hard time imagining the world where printed word was accessible in the same way that we have a hard time imagining a world without music everywhere. People would flock to concerts because they didn't have a radio. They would come to hear the stories read because they couldn't read or they didn't have the money to buy the book. Even in some of the things I read about Charles Dickens, that he himself went to auditoriums that were filled to read the latest chapter to people who wanted a good story. Dickens would read the stories aloud, and he pulled in the truth that he learned growing up in the Anglican Church. And he knew that people would lean in if the story was good. Jesus used the human propensity to lean into a good story, a parable or allegory. Like a wise rabbi, he would let his listeners tell him the meaning of the story. He would let them explain it. If you notice in that gospel lesson, he told the story and then he said, what do you think happened? That's wonderful. That engages everybody into the story. He would let them decide who was the good guy or the bad guy. And sometimes they got it right and sometimes they got it wrong. Jesus, in this particular gospel lesson, had just come into Jerusalem. He had had the triumphant entry into the city. He was celebrated by the crowd with shouts of Hosanna, Hosanna, which means, oh, save us. He was greeted by the religious leaders who questioned his authority. He responds to both the hosannas and the questions with wisdom and confidence. But he knows a storm is gathering. That's why he's come to the city. The Son of God has come to the city of God. So he goes in, according to Matthew, and he cleanses the temple, and he begins teaching. And he's talking to several groups of people, but these three at one time who are right there. His followers, those who have been with him these months and these years as he's been teaching, those who are interested in what he's saying because it's all new and fresh, and those who simply want him to hurry and go away. The crowds love him, the leaders fear him, the children cheer him, the rebellious need him, and the hungry and the helpless sit at his feet, hoping for bread for their bodies and food for their soul. So he tells them the story, the parable of the tenants. And some scholars say it's more of an allegory than a parable because each person and each element in the story represents something greater than just what they are in the story. So here are some of the three main parts of this parable allegory. He's telling the story about vineyards. And vineyards were a central part of the economy of that land, and they still are. The vineyard is a powerful and personal image, though, for the people of Israel. It doesn't just represent the grapes and the vine and the juice and the wine. It represents Israel, as that psalm spoke about. God brought that vine from Egypt and planted it. So it's personal for them. The other in the parable are the landowners. The landowners paid for the development of the land. They built the walls and the towers, and they hired the tenant farmers to work and to live in their fields and to make their fields productive. The wine, the raisins, the vinegar, the honey were all very profitable. And the division of that profit was an agreed-upon contract that was passed down. The heirs of the landowners received the land. The heirs of the tenants received the privilege to live and to work that land. It was an assured job and a home and a place. I hope you can imagine how important that would be if you didn't know how your children were going to make a living and they knew that they were going to inherit that position and that work. The tenants, though, they had a good job. It was a hard job. But they had a place to live, protection, food, and they were able to glean the vineyards after the first harvest. And a vineyard might take 3 to 5 years to yield a harvest and a profit, but once it was going, it yielded a return on the investment for years, even hundreds of years, I understand now. So Jesus tells about this particular landowner. He said he plants the field, he gets the land, he plants the field, he builds the walls and the towers and the winepress, rents the land to the tenants, and at harvest time he sends a messenger, a servant, to collect what is fairly his, what's been agreed upon in this contract. All of this according to the standard of the day. But the tenants seize the landowner's servants and they beat them. And the crowd listening to Jesus, you can hear them listening to the story, and they go, oh, that's not right. That's not good. So the landowner, Jesus says, tries again. He sends more servants, more tenants to do the same, more to collect. The tenants do the same or worse to them. They kill the second and stone the third. And in an ultimate act of patience and perseverance, the landowner sends his own son. He says, they will respect my son. But the tenants recognize the son and they plot against him and they lay hold of him, throw him out of the vineyard and kill him. oh, this isn't the way the story's supposed to go. So Jesus asked the crowd, what will the landowner do to those tenants? The crowd knows, and they get into the story with him, and they say, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end. He'll rent the vineyard to other tenants who will give him his fair share, his due at harvest time. The religious leaders are all there, and they see the unfairness, and they add their amen to the outburst. But then it occurs to them who the story is really about. A hush falls over the crowd as the leaders who just passed judgment on the tenants feel the powerful weight of their own verdict falling upon them. You see, this harkens back to King David. When Nathan confronted King David and told him a story, he said, there was a powerful man, but in his arrogance and selfishness, he took advantage of a poor man and took what the poor man had. David cries out in judgment on the man. And then I have this whole image of Nathan pointing. I used to say this crooked finger till mine became so crooked, but I'm going to use the prophet image anyway. Nathan points a crooked finger at the king and he says, you are that man. David is convicted and he rips his heart out before God. When Jesus spoke about the servants being killed, the people understood to whom he was referring. The prophets had come, been rejected, and killed themselves. Jesus' brilliant question allows the religious leaders to pass judgment on the tenants and themselves, and then their own words convict them. And you can hear them say, you are the tenants. Matthew Henry says, never did grace appear more than when the landowner sent his own son, knowing what had happened to those he sent before. You see, in any parable and allegory, there's truth to them, or we wouldn't have kept them and they wouldn't have value for us. The psychological truth is the story is that the tenants changed their mind about who they were and their place in this. They became selfish. They became, in their own mind, the owners of what was trusted to them. Do you know the mantra of a child? Let me see if I had it in here. This is the what children say, especially a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old. If I touch it, it's mine. If I once played with it, it's mine. Even if I think I might want to play with it, it's mine. And then a friend of mine said, but if it's broke, it's yours. This selfishness of mine becoming who we are. As Bonnie and I were sitting at the beach yesterday and we were watching the birds come, and I remembered the little scene from the non-biblical and historical story Finding Nemo. You can tell where I get of the seagulls all fighting over something, going mine, 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 mine. And they don't get anywhere because they're so busy possessing. That's what the psychological truth of this is, that when we become owners, we've changed our place in that. Abraham Heschel says, possession is equal to loneliness. The very word itself excludes others. It puts us in self-excommunication and loneliness. That's what mine does, and that's what mine, M-I-N-E, does for these landowners. They forget who they are and what they're to do there, and even the provision of the landowner back to the tenants. The personal truth is that it's very easy for us as well to see the selfishness and the sin of others. Everyone else thought somebody else fit the people in the parable until Jesus let the question linger, and then they all realized they had their place. We are not outside the story. We come to understand that we have a place in the purpose in the plan of God, in what we have and who we are, life itself, the grace of being in these places, in these moments. Know to whom you owe your place. There is no place in this real world in the obedience and the servant heart that we heard for the arrogant, power-seeking gardener. We are placed in leadership, in positions, in ministry to tend the vines. We don't own them. But we should do so with humility, with a non-possessive attitude, and a deep understanding of who we serve and why we serve. It's detrimental for all who are called to serve to presume to be owners of life. For when our place becomes position, we've crossed a difficult and dangerous threshold, and we lose the grace of belonging to Christ. A story. A young man was hunting for food and feathers, food for his family, feathers to make the fletching for his arrow. It had not been a successful hunt. He only had one arrow and no food for the table. He saw a beautiful bird high up in the tree, and the bird had long, perfect feathers. The young man took his arrow and bow and shot his last arrow at the bird. Startled, the bird took wing, and the arrow missed his mark, but hit a branch that hit the bird. Cushioned by the leaves, the bird fell to the soft earth below. Excitedly, the young hunter ran to gain his prize, but he found the bird alive, only stunned. "What should I do?" he asked. He knew the bird would provide only a small meal. But the feathers, on the other hand, would be valuable, and he could sell them for a great sum and feed his family well for a long time. He held the bird in his hands and marveled at its beauty. "I can't kill a bird like this, but my family needs the food, and I need the feathers." He wrapped the bird in a cloth to protect its wing, and he said to himself, "I will go to my father and take it home. My father will know what to do." And he walked the miles back home, holding the bird above the water as he crossed the river, feeding it worms he dug from the rocky path. He even placed it safely in his pack as night came and they slept under the stars. Even nestled in the pack, as light crept in the morning sky, the bird began to sing. It had been silent until this moment, but the song was thrilling and tender, and its delicate melodies echoed in the canopy above. He had never heard a bird song like this one. The hunter unwrapped the bird and held it gently. He said, "This was to be my prize. This was to be my fortune. But it is not mine. Its feathers belong on the wind, and its song belongs to God." And he set a bird on the holly branch and walked away, the richest of men. We are not owners. We are just tenants of this time, this place, this life. May we tend the privilege of grace with gratitude and humility. Thanks be to God.